Okay, so turning to probably the most technical issue, which is the debt crisis and limiting the debt crisis. Um, I don't think many
Well, you're
people.
hitting me with big ass problems here.
I know. Well, that's your book, big ass solutions. So I don't think many people who are paying attention to the economy understand just how big the U.S. debt crisis is because we just had an election, and me personally didn't hear the two candidates talk about the debt crisis at all. And you very rarely hear that brought up in, political media and things that people are talking about. But there are people that are sounding the alarm on it. And so I just wondered if you could just describe like the extent to the problem for people that have no idea what a debt crisis is or what this issue is about.
Happy to. So, the US is currently $36 trillion in debt, and it's growing at another $1 trillion every 100 days. We're digging a hole. I mean, you know this for your own home finances. If you keep spending money you don't have, you're going to dig a hole you'll never get out and you're going to go bankrupt. That's it, it's no different with the government. So we've got this just massive problem that when the politicians do mention it, with their hair on fire, oh, we got a big problem, they're not solving it. Some of them say, oh, well, we'll raise taxes for these people and we'll lower your taxes and we'll cut out some spending. But let me tell you something. That's not close to cutting it. Let me give you some perspective here. $36 trillion dollars of debt is the same amount of money as the government takes in taxes, the federal government, over 7 years. So if the government didn't spend a single penny, including interest, it would take 7 years to pay off the debt. So that's not happening, and it's not going to happen. So you may be recognizing that the politicians really aren't talking about solving this problem because they can't. It doesn't solve itself with raising taxes and lowering expenses. It's not going away. And I think it also gives, in answer to your question, some help in understanding what we're talking about of a trillion. It's hard to understand what that number is. And I've got a little tool you may have heard of, but let me just give it to you because I think it helps. So 1 million seconds pass in 11 days. 1 billion seconds is 32 years. And 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. It
Wow.
gives you an idea of how big a number we're talking about. So we have this problem that's just not going away. And I'm looking at this and saying, we got to do something radical. And going back through history, including the history of the United States, we've had this program called the gold standard that we used to be on. And it was a fascinating concept. It said that the United States has gold in storage in Fort Knox. And as much of the value of that gold, the government can print paper money and buy things with it, and put it into the system, into the country. And it was so pure that for a while, it was even possible for citizens to exchange like a $10 bill for $10 worth of gold. That didn't last very long, but that was the concept. It was that pure. So I'm looking at this, and I've got a very extensive, as you said in the beginning, a very extensive business background in accounting and operations like this. So I looked at this and I said, well, wait a minute. The U.S. has a lot more assets than just its gold. So we have vast amounts of public lands, parks, natural resources, oil, metals, ships, planes, military installations, schools, hospitals, and on and on and on. We have assets. And if we look at this, I renamed this program to from the gold standard to the asset standard. And under accounting principles, real accounting principles, an accountant would say, well, wait a minute, the US has many times more assets than just its gold. So, along the same thinking of if you have gold, you can print money. I'm saying you have assets. We can write checks and pay off the deficit. So, here's what I'm thinking: we send a check to China for $1 trillion. That's how much China has loaned. See, these are loans. When people buy US securities, they're loaning the government money. So China loaned the US money by buying its securities of $1 trillion. So we send a check to China with a thank you note and a check to your Aunt Betty. And the question is, will they cash the checks? And then will they clear? So China and your Aunt Betty are going to literally run to their bank and deposit those checks. And then the question is, well, will they clear? And the answer is yes, they will clear because they're written against the United States Federal Reserve Bank that says it clears. And we now are completely out of debt. The country can thrive. But as we've alluded to a bit in our conversation, we can't trust our government, who would have this tool to just spend as much as they possibly want for everything and anything. So I believe that we should pay off the deficit with this tool once. We should fund our underfunded programs like Medicare and Social Security. Add more money for the public schools to make them great. Create an emergency fund for to tide us through in case of another pandemic like COVID, and then to do this, I believe strongly we have to have a constitutional amendment that requires the federal government to have a balanced budget. Make it illegal. It cannot spend more money than it brings in on taxes, so that we never have this problem again. This can be done.
So when you talk about the U.S. government, they send a check to China or Aunt Betty or whatever,
right?
And it says $1 trillion, and the question is, will it cash? Will it cash out or will it bounce? And you're saying it under this plan it will cash because the U.S. has enough assets,
exactly
worth total assets worth to pay that off. But I mean, I guess my question is, so where is the actual cash coming from that is being used to pay that $1 trillion?
It's exactly like what happened with the gold standard. You didn't get actual gold. You got paper for things that the government bought. Okay. And that paper represented the asset of the gold of the federal government. So now we're sending checks instead of a paper bill and repaying people back. They deposit it, and their accounts in their home countries or their neighborhood bank gets credited with the money because it goes through the banking system, initiated by the Federal Reserve, covering that payment.
But so is that money coming out of the U.S. government budget, or where is that money that ends up in their bank account? Where is that coming from?
It's written against the assets of the United States. Okay, so it's just like with the gold standard. The gold stayed in Fort Knox, but the paper represented the value of the asset in Fort Knox, right? So now you have a check representing the value of America's asset. Now, let me tell you something. There's kind of an interesting question that you don't have to answer. It's not a test, but it's interesting for you and the audience to say, well, if the U.S. is bankrupt, how is it possible that the U.S. has the strongest economy in the world? We're 30% bigger than China. Catch this. We're 15 and a half times bigger than Russia. And the answer is we all kind of know in our gut, well, the US really isn't bankrupt. It's so strong and so powerful that it's not going to default on its debts. And part of the proof of that is every week, the government is doing an auction to sell more of its securities, US Treasury notes. And people from all over the world buy those Treasury notes. And incredibly, they are viewed across the entire world as the safest investment in the world, US Treasury notes. Clearly, we're not bankrupt. We all already, this is a hard thing to swallow. We're already on the asset standard. They've never declared it, and they're not using it. So it's a pretty fascinating thing.
So I just have two quick final questions. The first is, so I'm paraphrasing what you just said, and tell me if this is correct. The U.S. has their total assets are way more, the equivalent to way more than the debt we have.
Absolutely.
So if we take off the debt, subtract the total debt we have from our assets in order to pay off the debt, it's not really going to make that much of a dent in our total assets sheet.
Nothing happens.
Right. So then,
pretty surprising, right? It's like you're not even making it. You're paying off debt, and you're not even making interest payments because nobody's actually owed the money. You're using your assets.
And then, so the second part is to kind of circle a little bit back. Why, if we have all these assets, what is the problem if we never actually pay off this debt and just kind of say, well, we're not going to default because we have all of these assets in our kind of asset sheet. So eventually, if we really need to, we can just tap into them and we'll be fine. What is the effects of not doing this quickly?
That is such a profound, intelligent question. It really is. Because I can see the logic in that. But the US still has to pay interest. And interest right now is the third biggest expense of the federal government. The interest costs the federal government more than we're spending on our defense system. It's crazy. And it's just getting bigger and bigger because we do have to make those interest payments. Those don't go away. So that hole just on interest keeps getting deeper. And I quote in the book a source. I'm sorry, I can't remember who it is. That projects that we're going to be spending over the next 30 years $60 trillion in interest. So it's kind of like going to a loan shark, that paying back the money might be doable, but paying the interest is going to kill you. So your idea is logical. It really makes sense. Just never pay off the debt. Nobody's going to foreclose on you or anything like that. But the interest payments are going to bury you.
So it's the idea that if we just let this go, the interest is going to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, and then we're going to be toast.
Yeah.